I mentioned to you guys previously that I wanted to demo a little more advanced mock-up techniques. If you've got a design, not just for the Globe project, but if you've got any type of digital mock-up work that you want to do, and it does extend beyond just package design, how can you go about producing that? And we kind of started, I think we had a dialogue. This is Jonathan's package design, and I've got it on the screen here because I know in at least one of the previous sessions we kind of had a sidebar conversation about what if you have something that's a little bit different than just the mock-up, the standard mock-up template that you might be working with. And in this case, you guys all had the rectangular box carton mock-up that I furnished to you that was paired with the die line. And it works great. If you've got it works fantastic if you've got a standard design that is meant as this kind of, 6-panel wrap to your rectangle. If you don't have any window cuts, if you don't have any other, kind of funky components, you take your die line in Illustrator, you export it as a JPEG, and you guys copy and paste onto the panels. And the outcome is a very realistic dimensional rendering, digital rendering, albeit, that, works as a really close second to giving your client an actual physical prototype. So some cases this, works perfect, If you have something that's a little more advanced, and in this case, Jonathan's die line, and Jonathan, I hope you don't mind. Doesn't matter, even if you mind, it's too late. Jonathan, you schemed the idea of kind of an ingenious kind of option of expanding the amount of real estate you've got on your container here. And by expanding, I mean you have a pull-out tab that entices the consumer to find out more, get more details on the product, as it were. So out of the back of the rectangle of this container, you had a pull-out tab. That it was a 2-side panel, and it gave more information on that. And I hope I set this up right. Jonathan, you're welcome to mic up and jump in here if I somehow goofed this up. I don't think I did.
No, it looks great. Thank you.
No, I'm a little hesitant because I'm like, well, maybe I misinterpreted this.
No.
But I want to kind of go through what I did here, and I've also got a mock-up where I did the window cut. This one, where I actually have what appears to be a little vignette window that reveals, this is the goofy design I put together just as a mock-up. But I'll kind of break this down for you guys. And in brief, what you can do to create that illusion is you're going to take your JPEG, your flattened mock-up file, and you're going to use that as kind of a starting point for the package design. And I'm gonna go ahead and kind of toggle through these layers just so you get a sense of what we're looking at here. And I'll also demo it and attempt to recreate what I just did earlier with Jonathan's and walk through this step by step with you guys. For those of you who are a little more savvy at Photoshop, you can tune me out for a little bit here. And again, this isn't the only way to go about doing this. As we know, or as you should know, Photoshop, Illustrator, specifically Photoshop, there's a multitude of ways to accomplish the same visual effect, right? It's not like, oh, this is the only way to do it. This is the way I do it. This is the way I have done it. It's effective, works well. It's a manageable file, which means I can go in there and tweak things. So in short, what I did here is I built the mock-up, exported it as a JPEG, brought my JPEG into Photoshop, and then proceeded to slice my little window out, right? And I could see my window because I had that little, you can't see it now, but I had the little die line indication on my JPEG of where I wanted that window to cut out. And we can see it reveals the transparent background there. And when I was done doing that, Of course, I've got the background there, whether you have a background or not. Then what I did is I dropped in a light bulb, and there's a high-res light bulb in the asset folder. All of you guys, or many of you guys saw that, and it's the same light bulb I used on my packaging. And I just added a layer effect of a drop shadow on there just to give it some definition from the white background. So if we add these layers together, and I trust you guys can see the layers here because I'm sharing my whole screen. As we add these layers together, we've got the bulb layer, and then we've got this foreground layer, which is my JPEG that I've cut the hole in. So we can start to see the bulb is actually, we can see it through the window. Really, it's just layers. But then I'm going to add a couple different things in here that are going to help add further definition. And I've got a shadow layer that's above my bulb layer. And that's adding some shadow definition to the inside of the box, as it were. So it makes it appear as though it's more dimensional. Without that shadow layer, I kind of lose that effect a little bit. The bulb kind of gets lost in there. If I turn off my top layer, you can see that shadow is a pretty sloppy operation, right? It's literally, all I do is take a soft tip brush, and kind of spray it on there. And when I'm doing the brush effects on there, I typically set the opacity up on the top. You can see, you can set your opacity and the flow rate. You can adjust those. So right now I'm laying down a layer of black, essentially. And if I had the opacity set all the way up and I was trying to create a shadow, it would lay down this just, you know, asphalt black kind of effect. Generally what I'm doing is when I'm building a shadow and I've got it on a separate layer, I can go in there, I turn the top layer on, so I've got my package design there, I've got the bulb behind underneath that layer, and I'm working on my shadow layer. I'm going to use that soft brush. I'm going to knock the opacity down, so it's just laying down these faint hues and values. And then I'm going in there and just kind of laying it down, right? And because the shadow layer is underneath the top graphic with the box, I'm not laying the shadow on top of the box. So it just kind of creates this illusion of dropping even more shadow in there, right? The nice thing about the shadow layer being separate is you can also manage that, right? So I can take the shadow layer and I can lighten the opacity of it, right? So I'll turn this top layer off. So again, if I take the shadow layer, I can darken that. Go it a little darker, a little lighter. And again, generally I would do this with that top layer on so I get a good feel for, you know, how dark do I want that shadow? Okay. The last thing I do typically is to add and it's a subtle detail, but it can sometimes make all the difference in the world when you're trying to produce some really realistic mock-up, is to add some dimension to that stock, the paper, the substrate, right? So this package isn't made out of 1 pixel thick paper. I mean, right now it's pretty believable. It starts to look real. But one thing, it's a simple trick you can do is to add some dimension to that container, right? And we can make that dimension thicker or thinner. I can make it super thick if I want, or thinner. And if you're wondering how the heck I'm doing that, I'll try to explain this. So what I did is I took my top layer, I took this graphic layer here, all my graphics, and I copied that layer. So I took that layer, the top layer, copied it, dropped it right in place, and then what did I do? Can't remember what I layer, inverted it, and I can't, why can't I find it? Oh, because I'm on a hid layer. So if I was to take this layer, and that was the copy, I'm gonna go to adjustments, and I'm gonna invert that. And all it does is it just turns it into a negative or inverted image. For lack of a better term, it's a negative. So once I've got that negative, I'm gonna step back here. And again, I'm gonna do this demo with Jonathan's here because I'm gonna use a similar technique. Once I've got that negative image, then I can go back into adjustments and I can drop down the saturation so it's not that real vibrant kind of orange, which is the negative reverse or inverted value of the blues, if that makes sense. I'm not even making sense to myself anymore. But so I've got a negative image, and then on top of that, I've got the positive image. So all I'm doing with the negative image is, as long as I'm on that lower layer, I can nudge it. I can move it around. If I want that, for whatever weird reason, that layer of stock to be made out of like 1/8" foam core, and sometimes there's packaging that's a little bit thicker material like that, I can just nudge that thing around. You know, if I want it to be something a little thinner, but you know, it's still there, still substantial, that bottom layer is a really quick method of replicating it. And you know, from a distance, so to speak, that digital rendering, that mock-up rendering, really starts to look authentic, or at least in my opinion. And that's all that matters, is my opinion. So shadow, bold layer of inverted image. In the very top, you've got your graphic that you started with, your JPEG. So again, is this the only way? No, absolutely not. But I found it's a really effective way of creating digital mock-ups for anything dimensional. And again, it's a little sleight of hand with Photoshop, and it is about managing your layers and making sure that, you know, specifically the shadow layer, because you can really go in there and fine tune that thing and make it look, you know, pretty believable, like that's, you know, a real rendering. So back to Jonathan's, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ditch these layers. I'm going to toss them out and see how good I can get at recreating this graphic. So what we're looking at here, Jonathan, we talked about this earlier, the need for him to render his design in reverse because the mock-up, the angle of the mock-up didn't give us the right angle to pull those tabs out. In other words, the tab pulls out of the right-hand side of the box. So Jonathan rendered his mock-up in reverse. Worked perfect. So I downloaded that, and I flipped the horizontal placement of that JPEG, so it's back in a readable kind of format, so it looks appropriate here. But this mock-up is missing an essential component here, and it is that pull-out tab. So how to recreate that? I've got the kind of JPEG of the flat file here, and in this case, I know that this is that's the panel. Again, Jonathan has a top, not a top and a bottom, but a front and a back of this panel. That's the back side, and we're going to replicate this panel. And Jonathan has these retainer tabs that work as stops, as it were, so the panels can't pull all the way out. They kind of catch on the interior. And I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see this. I'm going to kind of break this down. On Jonathan's die line, he has this little recess or a die cut that allows for that panel to insert into the packaging, but again, it has those stops, so it keeps the tab from coming all the way out. So I'm just giving you a little background on this particular design. So to replicate this, I'm gonna take, and I'm just gonna do a quick cut rendering, and I'm not taking the whole tab. I'm just taking the portion that is going to be revealed, or at least the majority of it. I'm going to isolate that, and I'm doing kind of a quick cut. And I can see there's a couple little areas that Jonathan, you'll want to tweak. You don't have to do it for the class, but as you get into the portfolio and the things, your bottom line of text might get trimmed off there, probably would. And the globe type logo needs to be just, you know, a couple clicks over so that is fully revealed when that tab gets pulled out. That's one of those things that's kind of the nice thing about working up a mock-up. You know, designers oftentimes, this happens to me, I'm working on something, and until you actually get the prototype, until you actually start working on the mock-up, sometimes you miss those things. And this is kind of that final check and balance in the process where it's like, oh, geez, I've been overlooking that. So it's a chance to go in there and kind of remedy some of those, or fine-tune the graphics. So I've isolated it with the marquee, just a rectangular marquee. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to jump back over to the JPEG of the mockup, and I'm going to paste that in. And it just comes in giant. And there's also some parts of the bleed here that I want to eradicate. If you guys had all the time in the world and I thought I was really interesting to listen to, I would actually use the pen tool, and I'd go in there and remove that, nice clean vector. And I strongly advise you guys to use that. But I'm going to really cheat, and I'm going to use the magic wand there and do a really quick cut render. I know it's going to leave some remnants of junk there, but thank me for not wasting your entire afternoon. Do that. So I've got that whole area. That's the bleed for that tab. I'm going to take that off. I know there's some stuff there, but you know, we aren't going to worry about that. There's a little remnant there. So I got this panel. That's pretty much kind of what I'm thinking it's going to look like, but clearly it's not in the right dimension. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale this down, at least kind of get it within the neighborhood. And since Photoshop, with their ultimate wisdom, took the Shift Command click out of the scaling function, every designer in the world is cursing Photoshop for that. So I kind of get it down into the kind of relative scale, but now I want to manage this a little bit. And there's a couple we're looking at an isometric rendering here. Again, it's isometric. We're looking at three sides, kind of that beauty shot, that hero shot. Those are typically all isometric. We want to get that panel on the same kind of visual, you know, give it the same perspective, that angle of perspective. You can set up a grid for yourself. I'm going to eyeball this thing just to kind of wing it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to transform and do a distort. I like distort. It allows me to pull points and kind of drop it in. I'm going to pull that point over. I'm going to bring this down here. I'm going to kind of rough it in. I'm dropping this thing in. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the convergence of lines, right? So if we're working off of kind of a 2-point perspective. For those of you guys who are familiar with 2-point perspective, we have kind of these convergent lines. We have parallels that run here, so the tops are parallel. The back of the tops kind of run in close, kind of parallel to each other. They aren't exact parallel, but that's what I'm eyeballing, right? So as I'm pulling this bottom panel out here, I'm looking at how this extends, how the base of that package extends. I'm looking at this line, that defining forward fold line of the package for that, and kind of giving myself a point of reference, right? So get it in the neighborhood. I probably, just because I'm OCD, would probably wrestle with this for a while and invert the image and flip it upside down and do all sorts of things just to make sure it's kind of in the right neighborhood. Looking at where it is right now, I know that I'm probably, again, we got the globe logo. We'll probably nudge that over a little bit, but for now, it's believable. You know, it still needs a little massaging, but I've got that just set up right now. It's a separate layer, and I've got my background JPEG layer. And what I'm going to do is on top of that layer that depicts that pull-up tab, I'm going to create a shadow layer because I think there's some things right now. It's kind of believable, almost believable, but there's other details that are going to make this thing it's just going to sing. So I'm going to put a shadow layer on top of that. You can call it whatever you want. You can leave it as layer 2. Always give your layers names. So I've got the shadow layer, and if I go in there with the brush, right? So if I go in there with the brush, and I always use it, typically I use a soft kind of apertured brush, soft edge brush. If I go in there and try and, massage it, I'm going to get this weird overspray, right? So you get this. So a great way to eliminate that, use your magic wand. Make sure you're on the right layer. Click. I just clicked on the background, right? So if I click on the interior here, it's going to try and select those like or similar pixel values. But I know my background is pretty, it's a pretty, I mean, as far as the value range, it's really limited. So you can always fine tune it with the tolerance up here. So if you want to, zero in on specific pixels. And yes, I know I got a crusty edge here. Ignore that. So I've selected the background, and now I'm going to invert my selection. So instead of selecting the background, I'm selecting the reverse of that. I'm selecting the interior of this. Now I'm going to jump to my shadow layer because I don't want to be dropping shadow effect or darkening the pixels on the actual layer. I want to do it on the shadow layer, that specific shadow layer. So if I go in there with that brush now, and I've got it, generally shadows are going to be cool shadows or values from the background. We're working with a monochromatic, relatively speaking. I'm going to drop in kind of a shadowed effect there. And it's subtle. I'm not sure if this is completely picking up on there, but it's deepened, right? It's deepened from what it was initially. I'm going to deselect it, turn off the layers. So you can see right now, I just have this kind of soft edge shadow. And again, it's on a separate layer. So, if I'm like, I think it's too dark, I can go in there and I can lighten the opacity of that a little bit, right? So, or if I want to start over, I can just, erase that, start over. So the separate layers are really, really helpful for a designer or an image manipulator if you want to go in there and manage that. Keeping separate layers is really important. So I've got the shadow layer. I'm going to jump back to the pull-out tab because I think it's a little, by comparison to the graphics, it's more of a grayish, more of a washed out gray. So I'm going to go in there and adjust the hue and saturation, maybe bring the lightness up a little bit, maybe not too much. So I'm going to go in there and just tweak it a little bit, right? So it looks now like it's starting to fit, like it belongs there, like it's part of that piece. It's still a little high, so I'm going to select both my shadow layer and other layer and see if I can't nudge it down. All right, now I'm being OCD. So now I've got that, and the final kind of touch is to add dimension to that card, right? That pull-out card is not made out of, it's not one atom thick. It has substance to it. There's substrate there. We can see this container is actually made out of something significant as far as dimension. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to replicate that layer, duplicate it. And I'm going to take the layer copy and drop it on the bottom. Now I'm going to shut these layers off. So this is a copy of the layer. I'm going to take that and I'm going to invert that, right? It's just a reversed image. And now I'm going to switch on my other layers, and it's back there, right? It's activated, but it's buried underneath the shadow. It's buried underneath the original layer of that card. So now I'm going to take it, I'm just going to nudge it out a little bit, just to give it a little more substance. If you're looking really, if you're like me, you would go in there and you'd actually massage some of those lines out of the graphics, which wouldn't be difficult at all. And what is that? That's just graphics from underneath. But if you're, you know, as my stepdad would say, nobody would see it from the back of a horse. So it looks pretty good from here. Wondering where the heck did that saying come from? I don't know. So there it is. That's a little more advanced mock-up techniques. You guys can, you know, I find it enjoyable because you're really creating something that adds an air of authenticity to a design. And in a case like this, if you got a window cut, if you got something unique, if you got a reveal where your design shows some of the product inside, you know, cutting a window or cutting, you know, something unique to the packaging, it can really add value to and really fully illustrate what your design vision was like to a client who might not be able to hold a tangible prototype in the hand. So that's my demo. And again, if you guys have you know, projects, you know, certainly beyond this class, where you've got something you're trying to comp up a mock-up and you maybe want my take on it or advice, I'm more than happy to help you guys out with that. So I think I covered everything. Any questions you guys have?